A dog always sleeps hugging the baby. At first, it looks like the sweetest thing in the world, loyal, protective, almost magical. But then, the parents notice something terrifying. The dog refuses to move, night after night, pressed tight against their child's tiny chest. And when the baby starts struggling to breathe, they call 911 inches a panic. That's when they realize this isn't just affection. The dog has been sensing something they couldn't see, something invisible, something deadly. What secret danger has been hiding inside their home? And will this desperate family discover the truth before it's too late? I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The afternoon sun filtered lazily through the living room curtains, casting a soft glow over the peaceful scene. Brynna and Reeve Holt had finally succumbed to exhaustion on their worn but comfortable couch, a light blue blanket draped across their laps. The constant demands of caring for a newborn had left them grabbing rest whenever they could. Their baby boy, Miller, slept soundly in his bassinet nearby, his tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. His rosebud lips occasionally twitched in that mysterious way newborns had lost in whatever sweet dreams visited such new souls. Movement caught Brynna's sleepy attention as Rook, their rescue dog, padded silently across the carpet. She watched through half-closed eyes as the brindle-coated dog approached Miller's bassinet with deliberate care. Instead of his usual gentle sniff or quiet guard duty from a few feet away, Rook did something different. The dog pressed himself against the side of the bassinet, positioning his body as close as possible to Miller. With surprising gentleness, he rested his chin directly on the baby's chest. His soulful eyes remained fixed and alert, watching over the infant with an intensity that made Brynna stir. "Rook," she whispered, not wanting to wake Reeve. "Come here, boy." The dog's ears twitched at her voice, but he didn't move. His muscular frame remained firmly planted beside Miller, maintaining that peculiar position with unwavering focus. Brynna pushed aside the blanket and crossed to them. "Silly boy, let's give Miller some space." She reached down to guide Rook away, but the usually obliging dog resisted. His body tensed, not aggressively, but with stubborn determination. When she tried to lift him, he made himself heavier, a trick she'd seen him use when he really didn't want to move. "What's gotten into you?" she murmured, stroking his brindle coat. The sound of movement made her turn. Reeve had woken up, his hair slightly mussed from their impromptu nap. "Everything okay?" he asked, voice rough with sleep. "Yeah, just Rook being weird. He won't stop hugging Miller." Over the next several days, Rook's behavior became a constant pattern. During Miller's nap times, the dog would press close, maintaining physical contact. At night, he'd curl his body around the bassinet, creating a living barrier between the baby and the rest of the room. His usually mellow demeanor had transformed into something more intense, more purposeful. One afternoon, Brynna had to take Miller for a diaper change. Rook followed them to the changing table, whining softly when she moved the baby. As soon as she was done, he resumed his position, pressing against Miller with that same fierce devotion. "I think he's appointed himself official nanny," Brynna joked to Reeve over dinner, trying to make light of the situation. She rubbed her temples, fighting another of the headaches that had been plaguing her lately. Reeve frowned, pushing his food around his plate. "I'm more worried about the lease. You know how strict they are about pets. If the landlord thinks Rook is being aggressive." "He's not aggressive," Brynna protested. "He's protective. There's a difference." As if to prove her point, they heard Rook scratch at the nursery door, followed by a low whine. They'd started keeping him out of the room at times, trying to establish some boundaries, but the dog seemed distressed by any separation from Miller. The scratching continued, accompanied by more urgent whining. When they finally let him in, Rook made a beeline for Miller's crib. This time, they heard something new. A faint growl, barely audible, directed at the floor vents. "See?" Reeve gestured. "That's what I'm talking about. He's acting strange." Brynna sighed, a metallic taste lingering in her mouth that she couldn't seem to shake. "He's probably just adjusting to having a baby in the house. It's a big change for everyone." In the soft lamplight, she watched as Rook resumed his position next to Miller. The blue blanket they often used for afternoon naps had been draped over the arm of the nearby rocking chair, its gentle sheen catching the light. The scene before her seemed to burn itself into her memory. Her tiny son's chest rising and falling, the solid weight of their loyal dog pressed against him, the quiet room holding them all in its peaceful embrace. Yet something about the tableau nagged at her. Rook's behavior wasn't just unusual, it was insistent, desperate almost. His eyes held a knowledge she couldn't decipher, and his dedication went beyond simple animal affection. It was as if he was trying to tell them something important, but the message remained just out of reach. Each time she tried to dismiss it as new baby anxiety, Rook would do something else. Press closer, whine more urgently, or position himself more deliberately against Miller. His love for the baby had transformed into something more complex, a protective instinct that bordered on obsession. The dog's muscular frame trembled slightly, as another barely audible growl rumbled in his chest, his eyes fixed on the floor vent. Brenna watched him, her head throbbing, as that metallic taste grew stronger. There was something here she wasn't seeing, some connection she should be making, but exhaustion and daily demands kept pushing the thoughts away. In the quiet of the room, with the blue blanket's familiar comfort nearby and Rook maintaining his steadfast vigil, Brenna couldn't shake the feeling that this persistent, puzzling love was trying to tell them something vital, something they needed to understand before it was too late. The scene hung suspended in the peaceful afternoon light. Miller's tiny form safe in his crib, Rook's protective presence, an unmovable force, and the growing mystery of why their gentle rescue dog refused to let their baby out of his sight. The maintenance check was supposed to be routine. Brenna had barely registered it on her calendar, just another item in the blur of new motherhood. But when Lowell Drummond's heavy footsteps echoed through their apartment that Tuesday morning, everything changed. Their landlord's bulky frame filled the doorway as he inspected the heating system. His well-worn suit strained slightly at the buttons, and his sharp eyes missed nothing, especially not Rook, who was in his usual position, pressed close to Miller's bassinet. "What's that dog doing near the baby?" Drummond's voice cut through the room like a knife. Brenna stepped forward, instinctively positioning herself between Drummond and Miller. "He's just being protective." Rook's completely gentle. "Protective?" Drummond's laugh held no warmth. "That's a liability waiting to happen, and it's a clear violation of your lease agreement. The pet clause doesn't say anything about where Rook can be in our own apartment," Brenna argued, her heart racing. Drummond's face hardened. Section 8, Paragraph 3. Pets must be properly contained and supervised at all times. Having a dog that size next to an infant is not what I'd call proper supervision. He pulled a yellow notepad from his jacket pocket and began writing. The scratch of his pen seemed unnaturally loud in the tense quiet. "Consider this your official warning. Keep that animal away from the baby spaces, or you'll be facing eviction proceedings. I'm not having a tragedy on my property." He tore off the paper and thrust it at Brenna. His voice dropped lower, almost conspiratorial. "Between you and me, you'd be smart to get rid of the dog entirely. Young family like yours, you can't afford complications." After Drummond left, Brenna stood holding the warning notice, her hands shaking slightly. The yellow paper seemed to mock her with its official-looking scrawl. That evening, after Miller was asleep, she and Reeve huddled on the couch, speaking in whispers to avoid waking the baby. "We can't risk losing the apartment," Reeve said, running a hand through his hair. "You know how tight the market is. We'd never find another place we could afford." "But Rook isn't doing anything wrong," Brenna insisted. "He's gentle. He's never shown any aggression toward Miller. Just the opposite. It's not about right or wrong anymore. It's about following the rules." Reeve's voice held an edge of frustration. "We don't have money for a legal fight, Brenna. We're barely making rent as it is." Before she could respond, a sound from the nursery caught their attention. Miller's breathing seemed different, shallow and labored. When Brenna touched his skin, it felt clammy. "He's burning up," she said, panic rising in her throat. Rook whined softly from his spot next to the bassinet, his eyes never leaving Miller. The urgent care waiting room was harsh and bright, filled with the sounds of other sick children and worried parents. Miller felt too light in Brenna's arms as they waited, his little chest working too hard for each breath. When they finally saw the clinician, she seemed distracted and rushed. She listened to Miller's chest, checked his temperature, and glanced at his throat. "It's just a cold," she said, already reaching for her prescription pad. "Very common in newborns. Keep him hydrated, use a humidifier, and call your pediatrician if symptoms worsen." "But his breathing," Brenna started. "Congestion makes it sound worse than it is." The clinician cut her off. "He'll be fine in a few days." Back home, exhaustion settled over them like a heavy blanket. Brenna's head throbbed as she watched Rook resume his position next to Miller. The dog seemed even more determined now, if that was possible. His body was tense, alert, as if standing guard against an invisible threat. Over the next few days, Brenna began to notice something odd. Her persistent headaches and nausea would fade when she stepped out onto their small balcony for fresh air. The metallic taste that had been haunting her would disappear, but as soon as she went back inside, the symptoms would creep back. She mentioned it to Reeve one morning as she leaned against the balcony railing, taking deep breaths of the cool air. "It's probably just stress," he said, though his forehead creased with worry. "Between the baby, sleep deprivation, and now this thing with Drummond and Rook." Brenna nodded, but something about the pattern nagged at her. Like Rook's behavior, it felt meaningful somehow, important. But her tired brain couldn't quite connect the dots. Inside, Drummond's warning notice hung on their refrigerator, its yellow paper casting a shadow over their daily life. What had once been an endearing quirk, their dog's devotion to their baby, had become a threat to their stability. Every time Rook pressed against Miller's bassinet, every time he whined to be let into the nursery, Brenna felt the weight of their precarious situation. The apartment that had felt like a sanctuary when they first brought Miller home now felt different, tainted. The walls seemed to hold secrets, and Drummond's threat lingered in the air like smoke, invisible but suffocating. That evening, as Brenna rocked Miller to sleep, she watched Rook take up his usual position. His eyes met hers, full of an urgency she couldn't understand. She thought about the warning notice, about Reeve's worries, about the money they didn't have. She thought about the clinician's dismissive diagnosis, about her own mysterious symptoms that came and went. Rook's tail thumped once against the floor, a soft sound of determination. Whatever was driving him to guard Miller so fiercely, he showed no signs of stopping, and despite the threats hanging over them, despite the rational arguments for keeping him away, Brenna couldn't shake the feeling that Rook knew something they didn't. Something vital. The dog pressed closer to the bassinet, his muscular frame a barrier between Miller and whatever invisible danger he sensed. In the quiet of the nursery, with Drummond's warning casting its shadow and Miller's breathing still not quite right, their family's safety balanced on a knife's edge. The crash in the hallway jolted Brenna from her worried thoughts. She rushed to open their apartment door, Rook close on her heels. In the dimly lit corridor, Mrs. Chen from apartment 4B lay crumpled against the wall, her grocery bags scattered across the worn carpet. "Mrs. Chen!" Brenna knelt beside the elderly woman, who was conscious but disoriented. "Can you hear me?" "So dizzy, Mrs." Chen mumbled, trying to sit up. "Been having these spells all week." Other neighbors emerged from their apartments, voices overlapping with concern. Someone had already called 911, and within minutes, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Paramedic Una Reyes arrived first, her movements quick and purposeful as she navigated the cramped hallway with her medical bag. She had short, practical hair and wore a crisp uniform that spoke of countless emergency calls. "I'm Una," she introduced herself, kneeling beside Mrs. Chen. "Can you tell me what happened?" As the paramedic checked vital signs, Brenna's own persistent headache throbbed harder. She pressed her fingers against her temples, drawing Una's sharp eyes. "How long have you had that headache?" Una asked while taking Mrs. Chen's blood pressure. "A few days," Brenna admitted. "Maybe a week? It comes and goes." Una's gaze swept the hallway, noting details with professional precision. "Anyone else experiencing headaches or dizziness?" Several neighbors nodded or raised their hands. Rook, who had followed Brenna into the hall, began scratching at the heating vent near the baseboard, whining softly. "Interesting," Una murmured. She helped Mrs. Chen onto the gurney her partner had brought up, then followed Brenna back into her apartment for some paperwork. Inside, she noticed how Rook immediately pressed against Miller's bassinet, positioning himself between the baby and the floor registers. "Your dog seems very focused on the air vents," Una observed, her tone careful. "Where's your carbon monoxide detector?" Brenna and Reeve exchanged worried glances. "We don't have one," Brenna admitted. "Get one today," Una said firmly. "Until then, keep your windows cracked open. Those headaches, your neighbor's dizziness, your dog's behavior, they could all be warning signs." After Una left with Mrs. Chen, Brenna and Reeve found Lowell in his ground floor office. He barely looked up from his desk when they entered. "We need to ask about gas appliances in the building," Brenna began. "There aren't any." Lowell cut her off, his tone dismissive. "Everything's electric." But the paramedic suggested. "Listen," Lowell interrupted again, standing up. "This is an old building. It has quirks, but I don't need panic spreading about imaginary problems." "Could we just check the basement?" Reeve asked. "To be sure?" "Absolutely not." Lowell's face hardened. "Basement access is restricted. Liability issues. I'm not having tenants down there making up problems." As if on cue, they heard scratching from the hallway. Rook had followed them down and was pawing frantically at the basement door, his nails leaving marks on the old wood. "Get that animal away from there," Lowell snapped. You're already on thin ice with the pet policy. Don't make it worse. Brinna called Rook back, but her mind was racing. The headaches that vanished in fresh air. Miller's clammy skin that night. Rook's obsession with the vents and now the basement door. The pieces were forming a pattern she didn't want to see. Back in their apartment, she stood by the window, watching Miller sleep, while Rook maintained his protective vigil. The familiar rooms suddenly felt different, not the safe haven she'd created for her baby, but a space filled with invisible threats she couldn't fight. She opened every window wide, letting in the crisp autumn air. Her headache began to ease almost immediately, but the relief brought no comfort. Instead, it confirmed her growing fears about what might be lurking in the air they'd been breathing. Reeve wrapped his arms around her from behind. "We'll figure this out," he promised, but his voice carried the same worry she felt. Rook glanced up at them briefly before returning his attention to Miller, his body tense and alert. The afternoon sun caught his brindle coat, highlighting the grey hairs around his muzzle, their wise old guardian, who had been trying to warn them all along. Through the open window, they could hear the distant wail of another ambulance. Brinna wondered if it was headed for their building again, carrying more neighbors with mysterious symptoms. The thought settled like a weight in her stomach as she watched Rook adjust his position, always keeping himself between their baby and the nearest heating vent. Brinna stood in the aisle of the hardware store, comparing carbon monoxide detectors. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked the prices, finally selecting the cheapest model that still had decent reviews. $29.99 felt like a fortune with their tight budget, but Miller's safety was worth every penny. Back in her car, she pulled out her phone and texted Una, the paramedic whose concerned eyes had haunted her thoughts. "Got a detector. Any specific place I should put it?" The response came quickly. "Near sleeping areas, especially the babies. Keep it at breathing height. Document everything. Symptoms, times, detector readings. Save any communication with landlord." Brinna's throat tightened. The practical advice made the danger feel more real. At home, Reeve was waiting, his broad shoulders tense but his voice steady. "We're keeping Rook," he said before she could even mention Lowell's latest threats. "That dog hasn't left Miller's side for weeks. If the landlord wants to fight about it, then we'll fight." Brinna hugged him tight, grateful for his quiet strength. Together, they set up the detector near Miller's bassinet, following the instructions carefully. Rook watched them work, his chin resting protectively on the edge of Miller's bed. "Windows stay cracked from now on," Brinna insisted, moving through the apartment to open each one slightly. The fresh air felt like a blessing on her face, already easing the headache she'd grown used to ignoring. They waited, watching the detector's digital display. After what felt like hours, it gave a single sharp chirp. Then nothing but silence. Brinna's heart jumped, but the display showed no warning lights, no danger readings. "Maybe it's faulty," Reeve suggested, frowning at the device. "Or maybe whatever's wrong comes and goes," Brinna replied softly. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. Her eyes drifted to Rook, still pressed against Miller's bassinet. The dog's behavior hadn't changed. If anything, he seemed more determined than ever to stay close to the baby. The next morning, a new notice appeared on their door. Lowell's handwriting was sharp and angry. "Final warning. No dogs in infant areas. Violation of pet policy will result in immediate eviction. Proceedings." Brinna photographed the notice with shaking hands, then texted the image to Una. She was starting a documentation folder on her phone, just as the paramedic had suggested. That afternoon, Lowell left a voicemail. "Mrs. Holt, I've received reports of unauthorized modifications to utility fixtures. This is grounds for immediate lease termination. Additionally, I'm scheduling a routine inspection with our contractor for next week." Brinna saved the voicemail, her anger rising at his thinly veiled threats. She knew the contractor would be someone in Lowell's pocket, someone who would see exactly what the landlord wanted them to see. She started a symptom log on her phone. Day 1. Headache lessens near open windows. Miller's skin clammy during night feeds. Rook extremely agitated near floor vents. Day 2. Dizziness in bathroom. Miller's breathing seems shallow. Rook refuses to leave bassinet. The list grew longer each day. Reeve contributed his observations too, noting times and details with careful precision. The detector remained frustratingly silent, but Rook's behavior spoke volumes. He continued his strange ritual of pressing his body against Miller's tiny form, as if trying to share his own breath with the baby. Late that night, Brinna stood watching them, her baby and their loyal guardian. The apartment felt different now, its familiar walls suddenly menacing. Every vent, every crack, every whisper of air through the old building seemed to carry potential danger. The only thing keeping her grounded was the steady weight of her own certainty. Well, her own certainty. Something was wrong, and she wouldn't stop until she figured out what. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Una. "Keep documenting. Trust your instincts. I've seen this before in old buildings. We'll figure it out." Brinna touched Rook's head gently, feeling his solid warmth. Between the dog's unwavering dedication and Una's quiet support, she didn't feel quite so alone anymore. But the uncertainty remained, hanging in the air like an invisible fog. Was the detector faulty? Was the danger coming and going with the building's heating cycles? Why did Lowell react so strongly to any questions about the basement? She checked the detector's reading again. Still nothing. Outside their cracked windows, the city hummed with nighttime traffic. Inside, Rook adjusted his position slightly, never breaking contact with Miller's small body. The dog's dark eyes met Brinna's, and she saw her own determination reflected there. Whatever was happening, whatever Lowell was hiding, they would protect this baby together. Days melted together in a haze of worry and watchfulness. Brinna's headaches grew from a dull throb to sharp stabs that made her vision blur. She caught Reeve rubbing his temples more often, his normally energetic stride becoming sluggish as he dragged himself to and from work. "I'm just so tired lately," he mumbled one evening, slumping onto the couch beside her. "Must be all the stress." The carbon monoxide detector they'd bought became a source of constant anxiety. It would chirp once, maybe twice, then fall silent for hours or days. Each sound made Brinna's heart race, but it never sustained long enough to prove anything concrete. Rook's behavior grew more frantic. He spent hours pawing at the heating vents, his nails clicking against the metal until Brinna worried he'd hurt himself. When he wasn't at the vents, he'd plant himself at the basement door, whining with such desperation that it made her chest ache. The dog would eventually exhaust himself and collapse next to Miller's bassinet. His breathing labored as he pressed against the baby's side. Brinna gave up trying to sleep in their bedroom. She dragged pillows and their light blue blanket to the couch, creating a makeshift bed where she could watch both Miller and the detector. The blanket, soft from countless washings, became a constant companion during her nighttime vigils. "You need to rest. Properly," Reeve worried, finding her there one morning. "I can't," she whispered. "Not when something feels so wrong." Una proved to be a lifeline of practical support. The paramedic helped Brinna develop an emergency plan, walking her through each step with professional precision. "If that detector ever goes off for real," Una explained, "call 911 immediately. Don't wait. Don't second guess. Get everyone out of the apartment first, then make the call from outside." Brinna nodded, committing every detail to memory. "What about evidence?" "Document everything you can, but only after you're safe. Take photos if possible, but don't delay evacuation to gather proof." Following Una's advice, Brinna packed a go-bag with essentials, documents, medications, basic supplies for Miller. She placed it by the front door alongside everyone's shoes, arranged for quick access. Every night before trying to sleep, she checked the bag's contents and tested the detector's batteries. Time itself became an enemy. Each passing hour felt weighted with potential danger. Brinna found herself counting Miller's breaths, watching Rook for any change in his behavior, straining to hear the detector's silence. The apartment's familiar walls seemed to close in, holding secrets in every shadow. Just after midnight, as Brinna finally began drifting off beneath the blue blanket, the piercing shriek of the detector shattered the quiet. The sound stabbed through her head like a physical pain, but it was the sight before her that froze her blood. Rook, who had been sleeping beside Miller's bassinet, lurched to his feet. His movements were clumsy, uncoordinated, so unlike his usual grace. With what looked like tremendous effort, he heaved himself up and over Miller's sleeping form, draping his body across the bassinet like a living shield. His weight settled heavily against the baby, and his eyes, usually so bright and alert, looked glassy and unfocused. The alarm continued its relentless scream, no longer teasing with brief chirps but wailing a continuous warning that left no room for doubt. The danger they'd been sensing, that Rook had been trying to protect them from all along, was no longer invisible. It had finally revealed itself in that piercing alarm, transforming their creeping suspicions into terrifying certainty. Through the shrieking detector, Brinna could hear Rook's labored breathing as he maintained his protective position over Miller, refusing to move even as his own strength seemed to be failing. The dog's dedication, even in his distressed state, struck her heart with equal parts gratitude and fear. He was still trying to save her baby, even as the hidden threat began to overcome him. The detector's red warning light flashed in the darkness, casting eerie pulses across the room. Each flash illuminated the scene like a strobe. Rook's massive form draped over the bassinet, Miller sleeping beneath him, unaware of the danger, and the blue blanket now crumpled on the floor, where Brynner had thrown it off in her startled awakening. The moment stretched, crystallized by fear and the screaming alarm, as the invisible threat they'd been dreading finally made its presence known without any doubt. The detective's piercing shriek shattered Brynner's focus. Her vision narrowed to pinpoints as the room began to swim around her. A strange tingling spread across her face, and her thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. Through the haze, her eyes locked onto Miller in his bassinet, and her heart nearly stopped. His perfect little lips had taken on a bluish tint. "No, no, no," she whispered, her trembling fingers fumbling for her phone. The numbers on the keypad blurred, but muscle memory guided her through dialing 911. She switched it to speaker mode and dropped to her knees beside the bassinet. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice seemed to come from very far away. My baby, he's not breathing right. Carbon monoxide, I think. Please hurry. Brynner's words tumbled out as she carefully lifted Miller onto the soft rug. Rook followed, refusing to break contact, his body still pressed against the baby's side. She tilted Miller's head back slightly, just as she'd learned in the parenting class. Her own breathing was getting harder, but she forced herself to focus. 2 gentle breaths into his tiny mouth and nose, then compressions, careful, measured pressure with 2 fingers on his little chest. 1, 2, 3. Brynner counted aloud through the fog in her mind. The room spun, but she kept going. 14, 15. Another set of breaths. More compressions. Rook stayed right there, his weight somehow helping Miller's chest rise more effectively with each rescue breath. The dog's own breathing was labored, but he wouldn't budge. A familiar voice cut through the chaos. Una was on the line now, patched through by dispatch. Brynner, listen to me. You're doing great. Keep going until help arrives. I'm on my way. The paramedic's steady tone anchored her. Brynner focused on Una's voice, on the rhythm of compressions, on Miller's face. Everything else faded away except for this desperate dance of survival. Heavy boots thundered up the stairs, and suddenly the apartment filled with firefighters in protective gear. They moved with practiced efficiency, some heading straight for Brynner and Miller, while others made for the basement door with heavy tools. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the apartment as they forced the basement entrance. The door Lowell had always kept locked, claiming there was nothing down there but old pipes and dust. The acrid smell of gas grew stronger as the sealed door gave way. We've got an illegal setup down here, one firefighter called up. Unvented boiler tapped directly into the gas line. Get everyone out now! Oxygen masks appeared. One for Miller, one for Brynner, one even for Rook, who finally allowed himself to be moved once. The firefighters took over Miller's care. The fresh oxygen felt like life itself flooding back into Brynner's lungs. Her head began to clear as the rescue team quickly but carefully evacuated them from the building. Outside, in the cool night air, Brynner sat in the back of an ambulance with Miller cradled against her chest. His color was improving with each passing minute. Rook lay at their feet, accepting occasional pets from the EMTs who kept checking his oxygen levels too. Una appeared beside them, still in uniform from her own shift. She scratched behind Rook's ears with knowing fingers. You know, she said quietly, I've seen this before, with search and rescue dogs. They're trained to press their bodies against people trapped in avalanches or collapsed buildings. It helps keep them alive until help arrives. Brynner looked down at Rook with new understanding. He wasn't just cuddling with Miller all this time. No, Una confirmed. He was compensating, using his own body to help Miller breathe better when the air wasn't right. Dogs who've had that training never really forget it. Tears welled in Brynner's eyes as she watched firefighters and gas company workers stream in and out of the basement entrance. The door hung open now, its broken frame revealing the dark stairs beyond, the stairs that led to a deadly secret Lowell had insisted didn't exist. The illegal boiler squatted in the basement like an ugly confession, its jury-rigged connections to the gas line now exposed to the harsh glare of work lights. What had been invisible for so long was suddenly, brutally visible. The enemy had a name now. Carbon monoxide, seeping through their home like a ghost, kept at bay only by a dog who had refused to give up his protective vigil. Brynner hugged Miller closer, feeling his strong, steady breathing against her chest. She looked down at Rook, who gazed back with tired but alert eyes, still watching over his charge. Then her gaze drifted to the basement door, hanging open like a mouth finally forced to tell its truth. All the pieces fit now. The headaches, the dizziness, the detector's warning chirps, and most of all, Rook's stubborn, life-saving instinct to press close to Miller when the invisible danger rose. The Budget Inn's neon sign cast a soft pink glow through the thin motel curtains. Room 215 wasn't much, But after the night they'd had, it felt like sanctuary. Brynner watched as Rook finally allowed himself to truly rest, his chest rising and falling in deep, peaceful breaths at the foot of the queen-sized bed. It was the first time in weeks she'd seen him fully relax his guard. "Look at him," she whispered to Reeve, who sat beside her on the worn armchair, phone pressed to his ear as he waited on hold with their insurance company. "He's actually sleeping." Their defender was sprawled out, paws twitching occasionally in dreams. No more pressing against Miller, no more anxious pacing or whining at vents. The danger was past, at least for now. Miller dozed in the portable crib the motel had provided, his color healthy and pink. The steady sound of his breathing was the sweetest music Brynner had ever heard. She kept the baby monitor close, though in the small room it was hardly necessary. The local morning news had picked up their story. Brynner watched the report on the motel's small television, volume turned low. Breaking news: illegal boiler installation discovered in local apartment complex. Fire department officials say carbon monoxide levels could have proved fatal. Her phone buzzed with a text from Una. "City inspectors scheduled for tomorrow morning. Keep everything documented." Brynner opened her laptop and began organizing their evidence into neat digital folders. She had photos of every notice Lowell had posted about Rook, complete with timestamps. Her camera roll told the story. The warning about dogs near infants, the eviction threats, the notice about tampering with utilities. She'd even managed to snap pictures of the contractor's clipboard during that sham inspection. The detector logs were next. She'd taken pictures of the display each time it had chirped a warning. Then came her detailed notes of symptoms, headaches, dizziness, Miller's breathing problems. She added timestamps to each entry, cross-referencing them with calls to urgent care and Una's visits. "Insurance is sending an adjuster," Reeve announced, finally off hold. He rubbed his tired eyes and picked up his tablet. "I'm looking at short-term rentals now. Found a few possibilities within our budget." Brynner nodded, still focused on her documentation. Una had texted again. "Remember, stick to facts. Document everything, but don't dramatize. Let the evidence speak for itself." It was good advice. With her head finally clear of carbon monoxide, Brynner could see the path forward. They had proof of negligence, attempts at intimidation, and the fire department's official report would back up their story. The real city inspectors would find everything the landlord had tried to hide. "I printed everything," she told Reeve, gesturing to the stack of papers she'd run off at the motel's business center. Photos, timestamps, detector readings, symptom log, all of it. Plus Una's incident report from the neighbor's collapse and discursive action. That was our first real warning something was wrong. Reeve leafed through the papers, nodding slowly. "This is good, Bryn. Really good. We've got him dead to rights." The apartment building was sealed off now, yellow caution tape across their door. The basement entrance with its broken frame was locked and tagged by the fire department. Other tenants had been evacuated to temporary housing while inspectors prepared their investigation. The threat that had lurked invisible for so long was contained, exposed, documented. Brynner moved to sit on the edge of the motel bed, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was fading, leaving bone-deep weariness in its wake. She looked around their temporary shelter, generic art on beige walls, slightly threadbare carpet, the hum of an ancient air conditioner, and felt profound relief. They were safe. Miller was breathing easily. Rook could finally rest. Justice was on the horizon. Reeve joined her on the bed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We'll find a new place," he promised. "Somewhere without secrets in the basement." She leaned against him, watching Miller's peaceful sleep and Rook's relaxed form. Their little family had survived. More than that, they had fought back, gathered proof, called in authorities. The weight of fear and uncertainty that had pressed down on them for weeks was lifting. "I kept thinking I was just being paranoid," Brynner admitted softly. "That the headaches were from being a new mom, that Rook was just being overprotective, if Una hadn't noticed." "But she did notice," Reeve reminded her. "And you trusted your instincts about Rook. We all made it out. The motel sheets weren't luxury cotton, but they were clean and cool." As evening settled in, Brynner felt herself starting to truly relax for the first time in ages. Miller was sleeping soundly in his temporary crib. Rook had shifted only enough to press his back against the foot of the bed, still maintaining his protective position, but in a much more relaxed way. The day's work was done, evidence organized, calls made, next steps planned. Tomorrow would bring inspectors and insurance adjusters, the formal machinery of investigation and accountability, but for now, in this modest motel room, they had found a moment of peace. Brynner reached down to scratch Rook's ears. The loyal dog opened one eye briefly, thumped his tail twice against the bed, then went back to his well-earned rest. Their guardian could stand down at last. The invisible enemy had been named, exposed, and contained. Now it was time to let the system they'd documented everything for take over the fight. Lowell Drummond paced his living room, the weight of pending disaster pressing down on his shoulders. The fire department's report sat on his coffee table, official letterhead glaring up at him. His hands trembled as he picked up his fourth cup of coffee, spilling drops on his wrinkled shirt. The basement. That cursed basement held enough evidence to destroy everything he'd built. Not just this building, all of them. The unvented boilers weren't isolated to one property. They were his solution to cutting costs across his entire real estate empire. If inspectors started digging, he set the coffee down hard enough to slosh it over the rim. The clock read 11:37 at night. His mind raced through options, each worse than the last. Fines he could handle, lawsuits he could weather. But if they found the full scope of his corner cutting, the criminal charges would be inevitable. No choice, he muttered, grabbing his keys. No damn choice left. The drive to the apartment building was a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. His SUV's headlights swept across the empty parking lot as he pulled in behind the building. The basement entrance, still bearing the broken frame from the firefighters' forced entry, stood partially hidden in shadow. Lowell's hands shook as he unlocked the new padlock. The basement air hit him with its familiar, musty smell, now tinged with something metallic. His flashlight beam caught the illegal boiler setup, IISO, pipes jury-rigged into gas lines, venting nowhere. The whole deadly system exposed like a confession written in steel and copper. He'd brought what he needed: gasoline, rags, matches. Working quickly, he soaked strategic points around the basement. The evidence had to burn hot enough to destroy the core components. Make it look like an electrical fire, maybe. Something that would eat through the proof of his negligence. Just an old building, he rehearsed his story as he worked. Faulty wiring. These things happen. The gasoline fumes made him dizzy. Or maybe it was fear. He struck the first match with shaking fingers, watched it drop. The flame caught, spread, hungry. He struck another, then another. The heat built quickly in the confined space. Lowell scrambled up the stairs, slamming the door behind him. He doused the handle and frame with bleach-based cleaner from his car, trying to mask any gas smell that might escape. His breath came in sharp bursts as he hurried to his SUV. As he drove away, orange light flickered in his rearview mirror. The evidence was burning. By morning, there would be nothing left to find, nothing to connect him to, years of dangerous shortcuts. In her motel room, Brinna jolted awake at 3:15 in the morning. "The medical file," she gasped, sitting up straight. Reeve stirred beside her. "What?" "Miller's medical file. The urgent care visits, the symptoms log. It's still in the kitchen drawer. We need that for the inspector today." Reeve rubbed his eyes. "We can get it later, after the meeting, when things are more official." But Brinna was already moving, pulling on jeans and a sweater. "The inspector needs to see everything first thing. Medical records prove we weren't making this up." She lifted Miller gently from his portable crib. "I'll go early, before anyone's around. Quick, in and out." "Brinna, wait. I'll text Una the plan." She was already typing one-handed while settling Miller into his carrier. "She'll know where I am and when. It'll take 20 minutes, tops." Rook was up now too, alert and waiting by the door. His tail wagged once when Brinna grabbed his leash. "At least let me come with you," Reeve said. "You have that early meeting with the insurance adjuster. We'll be fine. Rook's coming, and I'll have my phone. Really, it's just grab and go." Before Reeve could argue further, she was out the door, Miller secure against her chest, Rook trotting beside her. The pre-dawn air was cool and damp. Her text, to Una sent with a soft chime. Heading to apt to grab medical file from kitchen. "Should be there by 4 am, out by 4:15. We'll update when done." The drive was quick on empty streets. Brinna parked in her usual spot, noting the absence of Lowell's distinctive SUV. Good, no chance of running into him. Still, something felt off. The air around the building seemed warmer than it should, and there was an odd smell under the sharp scent of cleaning products. "Just grab the file and go," she reminded herself, unclipping Rook's leash as they entered the building. The dog moved ahead of her up the stairs, nose working. The stairwell definitely felt too warm. Their apartment door stood unmarked among the others. Brinna's key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, everything looked exactly as they'd left it. The blue blanket still draped over the couch, Miller's bassinet in the corner, their lives frozen in the moment of evacuation. She moved quickly to the kitchen, Miller still snug in his carrier. The drawer stuck slightly as she pulled it open, but there was the file, right where she'd left it. She grabbed it, already turning to leave. Rook whined softly by the door. The warmth that had seemed odd in the stairwell was more noticeable now. And that smell was that smoke. The first whisper of smoke curled under the door like a poisonous snake. Brenna's heart slammed against her ribs as the faint grey tendril thickened into an angry cloud. Heat bloomed through the walls, and the air grew dense with danger. "No, no, no," she whispered, clutching Miller closer to her chest. The medical file dropped forgotten to the floor as she spun toward the door. But when she reached for the handle, scorching metal bit into her palm, she yanked back with a cry of pain. Through the crack beneath the door, orange light flickered like demon's teeth. The smoke was getting thicker now, filling the apartment with its choking presence. Miller began to cough, his tiny body shuddering against hers. "Think," she commanded herself. "Think." The light blue blanket still draped across their couch caught her eye. She lunged for it, then dropped to her knees. Working quickly, she stuffed the edge under the door crack, adding a damp kitchen towel beside it to block the smoke's advance. "Help!" she screamed, rushing to the window. "Somebody help us!" But the window wouldn't budge. The frame had warped in the growing heat, sealing them inside like a tomb. Miller's coughs grew more desperate, each tiny gasp tearing at Brenna's heart. Rook barked sharply, his deep voice echoing off the walls. The dog's eyes were wild, darting between Brenna and the door. Then, before she could stop him, he wheeled around and bolted through the small dog door they'd installed, the one Lowell had complained about but never officially banned. "Rook!" Brenna called after him, but the dog was gone. She heard his claws scraping against the floor as he raced toward the alley exit. The heat pressed closer, making it hard to think. Brenna fumbled for her phone with trembling fingers. The screen glowed briefly as she typed a single word to Una. "Trapped." Then the device went dark, overcome by the heat or smoke or both. Miller whimpered against her chest, his breathing growing more labored. Brenna pulled her shirt up over his face, trying to filter the air for him. The smoke was everywhere now, stinging her eyes and scratching her throat. In the distance, sirens wailed. So far away, too far away. Would they make it in time? The thought sent fresh panic coursing through her veins. "Focus," she told herself. "You're all he has right now." She forced herself to study the window methodically, despite the terror clawing at her chest. The hinges looked old, possibly weak. If she could find something heavy enough, her shoe, she yanked it off and gripped it tight, ready to swing. But first, she needed to protect Miller from any flying glass. Brenna looked around frantically, spotting his baby blanket near the bassinet. She snatched it up and wrapped it around him, covering his face while leaving him room to breathe. The heat was becoming unbearable now. Sweat ran down her face, and her lungs burned with every breath. The orange glow under the door had turned angry red, and she could hear the hungry roar of flames in the hallway. The sirens grew louder, but Brenna couldn't wait. She held Miller tight against her with one arm, raised her shoe with the other, and swung at the window with all her strength. "Help!" she screamed again, voice raw. "We're up here! Please!" The glass shuddered but held. She hit it again, harder, desperation lending her strength. A small crack appeared in the corner. Again. Again. Each impact sent vibrations up her arm, but she couldn't stop. Miller needed air. Miller needed out. Nothing else mattered. The smoke swirled thicker around them, dancing in the weak light filtering through the window. Brenna could barely see now, barely breathe. But she kept swinging, kept fighting. The crack spread like a spider's web across the glass. Just a little more, she thought. Just a little longer. The sirens were very close now, their wail piercing through the roar of the fire. But the flames were closer still, eating through the door, turning their home into an inferno. Brenna hit the glass one more time, putting everything she had left into the swing. The window shuddered, cracked, but still didn't break. "Please," she whispered, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. "Please." The heat pressed in, the smoke thickened, and somewhere in the building, something crashed with a terrible sound. Brenna held Miller closer, trying to shield him with her body as she faced the stubborn window. She could hear shouting now, from the street below. Help was coming. But would it arrive in time? The flames were at the door, and the smoke was winning, and her vision was starting to blur at the edges. One more swing, she told herself. Just one. More. Frantic barking cut through the smoky haze. Brenna rushed back to the window, peering down through watering eyes. There was Rook, standing in the alley below, his dark form barely visible in the pre-dawn gloom. He wasn't just barking randomly. He was looking up at them, then darting towards something off to the side. "What is it, boy?" Brenna croaked. her throat raw from the smoke. Following Rook's movement, she spotted it, rusted fire escape tucked against the building's shadow. Hope flared in her chest, but it died just as quickly. The metal looked ancient, corroded by years of rain and neglect. Worse, it was barely wide enough for a single person. There was no way she could safely carry Miller down those narrow steps. Another crash echoed behind her as something in the apartment gave way. The heat pressed against her back like a physical force, and Miller whimpered against her chest. They were running out of time. Gathering her remaining strength, Brenna braced herself against the window frame and pushed with everything she had. The warped frame groaned in protest, but finally gave way just enough to create an opening. Fresh air rushed in, sweet and cool against her smoke-scorched face. "Brenna!" She looked down to see Reeve running into the alley, his face pale in the growing firelight. He must have gotten Una's alert. "The fire department's almost here," he called up. "Just hold on." But Brenna knew they couldn't wait. The apartment was becoming an oven, and Miller's breathing was getting worse by the second. Her eyes fell on the light blue blanket still wrapped around her son. "Reeve!" she shouted back, her mind racing. "I'm going to lower Miller down to you." "What? How?" "The blanket." She was already moving, laying Miller gently on the floor away from the worst of the smoke. With trembling fingers, she worked quickly, knotting the blanket around Miller's tiny chest and under his arms, making sure it supported his head. She tested each knot, with hard tugs, knowing her baby's life would literally hang in the balance. "Are you sure about this?" Reeve called up, but he was already positioning himself beneath the window, arms outstretched and ready. No choice. The heat behind her was becoming unbearable. She could hear the fire eating through the door, hungry for more. "Get ready." Brenna lifted Miller, now securely wrapped in his makeshift harness, and carefully maneuvered him through the window opening. The blanket's fabric was strong. She'd picked it specifically for its durability, but it had never been meant for this. Her heart thundered in her chest as she began lowering her precious cargo, inch by agonizing inch. "Easy," Reeve called up. "You're doing great, honey. Just a little at a time." She didn't dare look down, focusing instead on the steady movement of her hands, on keeping the blanket from twisting. Miller was surprisingly quiet, as if he sensed the gravity of the moment. The blanket slipped through her fingers, burning them with friction, but she maintained her grip. Rook paced below, whining anxiously as he watched Miller's descent. The dog's ears were perked forward, his entire body tense, as if ready to spring into action if needed. "Almost there," Reeve called. "Just a few more feet." Brenna's arms trembled with exhaustion and strain. Smoke billowed around her, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. But she kept going, paying out the blanket with careful precision. Nothing else mattered except getting Miller safely down. "Got him!" Reeve's triumphant cry sent relief flooding through her body. "He's okay, Brenna. I've got him." She heard Una's voice joining the chorus below, professional and reassuring. The wail of fire engines grew louder, emergency lights painting the alley walls in strobes of red and white. Brenna's arms felt like lead, muscles quivering from the effort and the adrenaline. She sagged against the window frame, gulping in the relatively fresh air from outside. The fire roared behind her, reminding her that her own escape was far from assured. The inferno had fully breached the door now, filling the apartment with thick, choking smoke and waves of blistering heat. But Miller was safe. Her baby was safe in his father's arms, with Rook standing guard beside them and help finally arriving. For that moment, nothing else mattered. With Miller safely below, Brenna turned her attention to her own escape. The apartment behind her was now fully engulfed, waves of scorching heat pressing against her back. The window frame, warped from the fire's intensity, seemed to mock her with its narrow opening. She knew she had only moments before the entire structure could give way. Taking a deep breath of the slightly clearer air near the window, Brenna twisted her body sideways and began working her shoulders through the tight space. The metal edges scraped against her skin, tearing her shirt and leaving angry red marks along her arms. She gritted her teeth against the pain and kept pushing, refusing to let fear take hold. "You can do it, honey," Reeve called from below, his voice steady despite the fear she knew he must be feeling. He held Miller close to his chest, their baby now awake and fussing quietly. The window frame creaked ominously as Brenna forced her way through. For one terrifying moment, she thought she might get stuck, trapped between the inferno behind and the drop ahead. But then her hips cleared the frame, and suddenly she was fully outside, bare feet scrambling to find the first rung of the fire escape. The metal burned against her skin. The fire's heat had turned the entire structure into a giant radiator. Brenna hissed in pain but forced herself to grip the ladder anyway. She couldn't afford to be gentle or careful now. Each second she hesitated was another second the fire had to spread. "That's it," Una shouted encouragement from the alley. "Keep moving, don't stop." Brinna established a rhythm. Grip, release, step down, repeat. The rusted ladder protested with every movement, small flakes of corroded metal falling away like deadly snow. Her heart thundered in her chest, but her mind was crystal clear. This wasn't panic anymore, this was pure survival instinct. Halfway down, disaster struck. The rung beneath her foot suddenly gave way with a sharp crack. Brinna's stomach lurched as she dropped, a scream caught in her throat. Her hands clamped down automatically on the sides of the ladder, muscles screaming as they absorbed her weight. The sudden stop jarred her entire body, but she held on. "Brinna!" Reeves' shout was filled with terror. "I'm okay!" she called back, though her voice shook. She forced her feet to find the next solid rung, testing it carefully before trusting it with her weight. Keep going," she whispered to herself, the mantra helping her focus past the fear and pain. Below, Rook paced in anxious circles, his claws clicking against the concrete. The dog's eyes never left her, tracking her descent with intense focus. When she was about 8 feet from the ground, he moved to stand beside Reeve, positioning himself as if ready to catch her if she fell. The last few rungs seemed to take forever, each movement deliberate and careful. Brinna's lungs burned from the smoke she'd inhaled, and her arms trembled with exhaustion. But finally, her feet touched solid ground, her knees nearly buckled with relief. Una was there immediately, an oxygen mask in hand. "Here, breathe," she ordered, fitting the mask over Brinna's face. The cool, pure oxygen felt like heaven in her scorched lungs. Around them, the scene had transformed into organized chaos. Fire trucks lined the street, their emergency lights painting everything in surreal flashes of red and white. Firefighters rushed past them toward the building, hauling hoses and equipment. The sound of breaking glass accompanied their forceful entry into the burning structure. Brinna turned to look, up at the window she'd just escaped from. Flames were visible now, licking at the frame she'd squeezed through just minutes before. The sight made her shudder. They'd gotten out just in time. "Let me check you over," Una said, her paramedic training taking over. She gently examined the scrapes on Brinna's arms and the burns on her feet. But Brinna's attention was fixed on Miller. Her baby was squirming in Reeves' arms, face scrunched up in what looked like ordinary fussiness rather than distress. The sight of him, alive and clearly annoyed by all the commotion, made her eyes fill with tears. Reeves stepped closer, shifting Miller so Brinna could see him better while still keeping the oxygen mask in place. "He's perfect," Reeve assured her, his own voice thick with emotion. "Not a scratch on him." Rook pressed against their legs, his whole body wiggling with relief now that his family was safely reunited. The dog's earlier intensity had melted away, replaced by his usual gentle demeanor. Brinna took another deep breath of oxygen, feeling it clear her head. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving her shaky but triumphant. They had made it. Against all odds, against fire and fear and a landlord's negligence, they had survived. She reached out with one hand to touch Miller's cheek, needing the physical confirmation of his safety. His skin was warm but not hot, his color good. He turned toward her touch, making little grunting noises that were so perfectly normal, so wonderfully ordinary, that fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. The night air felt blessedly cool against her smoke-heated skin. Brinna leaned against Reeves' shoulder, keeping the oxygen mask in place as Una had instructed, and let herself truly breathe for what felt like the first time in hours. The fear and uncertainty that had haunted their lives for weeks had burned away in the fire, leaving behind something stronger, the absolute certainty that she would do anything to protect her family, and the proven knowledge that she could. The wail of sirens still bounced off the brick walls of surrounding buildings when a sleek black sedan crept around the corner. Behind the wheel, Lowell Drummond's face was tight with barely contained panic as he surveyed the chaos unfolding in front of his property. Fire trucks blocked most of the street, their emergency lights painting everything in stark flashes of red and white. Firefighters hustled back and forth, dragging heavy hoses toward the building's entrance. Lowell's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as he eased the car forward, trying to blend into the gathering crowd of onlookers. His plan had been simple: torch the evidence, collect the insurance, and walk away clean. Now it was falling apart in spectacular fashion. He hadn't counted on Brinna returning so early, hadn't expected anyone to be in the building, and he certainly hadn't planned on the full force of emergency response lighting up his quiet street like a carnival. As his sedan inched past the mouth of the alley, Lowell's gaze caught on the small group huddled near an ambulance: the young mother, her husband, that meddling paramedic who'd asked too many questions. His lip curled in frustration. They should have been gone by now, moved on to become someone else's problem. But it was the dog that proved his undoing. Rook's head snapped up at the distinctive purr of the sedan's engine. The dog's nostrils flared, catching the scent of smoke and accelerant that still clung to Lowell's clothes. In an instant, the gentle family pet transformed into something fiercer, a guardian with a score to settle. Before anyone could react, Rook launched himself toward the slowly moving car. His powerful jaws clamped down on Lowell's sleeve through the open window, catching fabric and flesh in an unshakable grip. The sudden force yanked Lowell sideways in his seat. "Get off! Let go!" Lowell's shout was more panicked than commanding. His foot slipped off the brake as he tried to wrestle free of the dog's hold. The sedan drifted forward, picking up speed. Lowell fought with both the steering wheel and the dog, but Rook wouldn't release his grip. The car veered sharply, and with a resounding crash, the front bumper collided with a fire hydrant. The impact wasn't severe, but it was loud enough to draw every eye in the vicinity. The metallic crunch of metal meeting metal echoed through the street like a dinner bell calling predators to feast. "That's him!" Brenna's voice cut through the chaos, strong and clear despite the oxygen mask she'd just removed. "That's Lowell Drummond, our landlord." Police officers who had been securing the scene converged on the vehicle. Rook finally released his grip, backing away with a low growl as uniformed officers surrounded the car. "Sir, step out of the vehicle," one officer commanded, hand resting meaningfully on his holster. Lowell's attempt at dignity crumbled as he emerged from the car. His expensive suit was rumpled, one sleeve torn where Rook had grabbed him. The smell of smoke clung to him like cheap cologne. Una stepped forward, her paramedic uniform lending authority to her words. "This is the property owner I reported last week about suspected carbon monoxide issues. He refused to allow inspection of the basement heating system." Two firefighters jogged over from the building entrance, their faces grim behind smoke-smudged skin. "Chief wants you to know we found clear signs of accelerant in the basement," one reported to the police. "Looks like someone tried to torch the place to cover their tracks." Lowell's face went from red to ash-white in seconds. "Now wait just a minute," he began, raising his hands in protest. "This is all a misunderstanding." But it was too late for explanations. As an officer began reading him his rights, the distinctive red light of a news camera clicked on. A reporter who had been covering the fire thrust a microphone forward, capturing the moment. Lowell's wrists disappeared into handcuffs. "Get him out of here," the senior officer ordered, and Lowell was led away to a waiting patrol car. In the hours that followed, the truth began to unspool like a dropped ball of yarn. Investigators, armed with probable cause and search warrants, discovered a pattern that stretched across Lowell's entire real estate portfolio. Building after building revealed the same dangerous shortcuts: AIN, unvented heating systems, illegal gas lines, disabled safety equipment. The friendly Inspector Lowell had arranged to cover his tracks was quickly identified and called in for questioning. Under pressure, he began naming names, revealing a network of corruption that had allowed these dangerous conditions to persist for years. Brenna watched it all unfold from the safety of the ambulance's tailgate, Miller secure in her arms and Rook standing guard at her feet. The dog's posture was relaxed now, his earlier ferocity replaced by his usual gentle demeanor. But there was a new confidence in the way he held himself, the bearing of a protector who had fulfilled his duty. "You know," Una said, checking Miller's vital signs one final time, "Rook probably saved more than just your family today. Once they finish investigating all of Drummond's properties, there's no telling how many other people will be protected from the same danger you faced." Reeve wrapped an arm around Brenna's shoulders, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "Our guard dog turned out to be a hero in more ways than one." Brenna reached down to scratch behind Rook's ears, her throat tight with emotion. The system that had nearly cost her son's life was being dragged into the light, exposed by the very fire meant to hide it. Justice wouldn't erase the fear and danger they'd endured, but it would prevent other families from facing the same threat. Fire crews continued their work in the background, securing the building and documenting evidence. The news camera panned across the scene, capturing the aftermath of a story that would lead tomorrow's broadcasts. But Brenna's attention remained fixed on her small family, husband, baby, and the loyal dog who had helped save them all. In the bright morning light of their temporary motel room, Brenna spread the newspaper across the small table. The headline blazed in bold letters: "Landlord charged in carbon monoxide crisis, multiple properties under investigation." Below it, a photo showed Lowell Drummond being led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face a mask of defeat. The charges kept mounting with each passing day. The district attorney's office moved swiftly, filing multiple counts of criminal endangerment, dozens of building code violations, and first-degree arson. The severity of the charges reflected not just the fire, but the calculated nature of the danger Lowell had created across his properties. "Look at this," Reeve said, scrolling through news updates on his phone. "They're saying he could face up to 20 years if convicted on all counts." Brinna bounced Miller gently in her arms, the baby contentedly playing with the edge of the now famous light blue blanket. "What about that inspector who helped cover everything up?" "Lost his license yesterday," Reeve confirmed. The licensing board didn't even wait for the criminal case to conclude. They said his actions showed gross negligence and willful disregard for public safety. The ripple effects spread through the city like waves from a stone dropped in still water. The mayor's office established a dedicated hotline for tenant safety complaints. Building inspectors, newly vigilant, began systematic checks of rental properties across the city. Other landlords, seeing Lowell's fate, rushed to bring their properties up to code. Una kept them updated on the investigation's progress. She'd become more than just the paramedic who helped save them. She was now a friend and ally in their journey toward justice. Her initial report about the carbon monoxide concerns had proved crucial in establishing the timeline of negligence. "The fire department's going through all of Drummond's properties," she told Brinna over coffee one morning. "They've already found 3 more buildings with similar setups, hidden boilers, disabled detectors, the works. You weren't the only ones at risk." The search for a new home took on fresh urgency and meaning. Brinna and Reeve approached each potential rental with hard-earned wisdom, asking detailed questions about safety systems and maintenance records. They requested documentation of regular inspections and insisted on testing every detector themselves. Their diligence paid off when they found a ground-floor apartment in a well-maintained building. The property manager, aware of their story from the news, walked them through every safety feature. She showed them current inspection certificates, demonstrated the carbon monoxide and smoke detectors, and provided detailed maintenance records going back 5 years. "And of course," she added with a warm smile, "we're pet-friendly. After what your dog did, we'd be honored to have him here." Rook's heroism hadn't gone unnoticed. The local Animal Welfare Society, working with the fire department, organized a small ceremony to recognize his life-saving actions. On a sunny afternoon, Brinna watched with pride as Rook sat patiently while the fire chief draped a special collar around his neck and presented a framed certificate declaring him a certified canine hero. The ceremony included a surprise, a modest stipend for Rook's future veterinary care, donated by local businesses touched by the story. "It's the least we can do," the society director said, "for a dog who showed us all what it means to be a guardian." In their new apartment, life began to find its rhythm again. The walls were freshly painted, the windows opened easily, and most importantly, the air was clean and safe. Rook seemed to sense the change. His desperate vigilance gave way to a more relaxed watchfulness. He still checked on Miller regularly, but now it was with the calm assurance of a protector who knew his charge was secure. One afternoon, Brinna sat down to organize the last of the documents from their ordeal. She came across the detailed timeline she'd created. Nate, dates, symptoms, conversations, all carefully noted. It had helped prosecutors build their case against Lowell and the corrupt inspector. Making a copy, she folded it carefully and wrote a note to Una. "Thank you for believing us when others wouldn't. Your support helped turn our instincts into action. Here's the timeline that helped bring truth to light. Something to remember that one person's attention can save lives." The immediate danger had passed, but its impact lingered in Brinna's changed perspective. Her maternal instinct to protect had been transformed by fire and fear into something more structured, more purposeful. She found herself noting safety features wherever she went, speaking up when she spotted potential hazards, sharing their story with other parents. "You've become quite the safety advocate," Reeve observed one evening, as she finished writing a letter to the city council about improving rental inspection requirements. Brinna looked up from her letter, watching Miller sleep peacefully in his crib while Rook dozed nearby. The carbon monoxide detector on the wall glowed with a steady green light, a constant reminder of both danger and vigilance. "Someone has to speak up," she said quietly. "Sometimes protecting one family means protecting them all." The soft evening light filtered through clean windows, casting gentle shadows in their new home. The air was clear, the detectors worked, and their family was safe. But more than that, they had helped create change that would keep other families safe too. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about making sure what happened to them couldn't happen to anyone else. Brinna sat in Una's living room, nervously twisting a course catalogue in her hands. The paramedic had invited her over to discuss something important, and now Brinna found herself staring at EMT training brochures spread across the coffee table. "You already know the basics of infant CPR," Una said. her voice gentle but encouraging. "I saw how steady your hands were that night, even through the fear. You've got what it takes." The memory of that night flashed vivid in Brenna's mind, counting compressions on the rug, Miller's tiny chest beneath her fingers, Rook's weight helping maintain the rhythm. She'd moved on instinct then, but now she yearned for something more. "I keep thinking about those moments," Brenna admitted. "How different things might have been if I hadn't known what to do, if you hadn't taught me the signs to watch for." Una leaned forward, her eyes bright with understanding. "That's exactly why I think you'd make an excellent EMT. You've lived through the worst kind of emergency, and you kept your head. That's not something you can teach. It's something you have." The course schedule was demanding. 3 evenings a week plus weekend practical training. Brenna studied the requirements, calculating childcare needs and household adjustments in her head. When she brought the idea home to Reeve that evening, his response surprised her. Instead of listing obstacles, he immediately started problem solving. "I can switch to early shifts," he said, already pulling up his work calendar. "That way I can be home with Miller during your evening classes. We'll make it work." Their new apartment became command central for Operation EMT, as Reeve jokingly called it. The kitchen table transformed into a study space after Miller's bedtime. Flashcards with medical terms appeared on the refrigerator. The light blue blanket that had seen them through so much now draped over Brenna's shoulders during late-night study sessions. The first few weeks were the hardest, as they all adjusted to the new routine. Brenna would rush home from work, spend precious time with Miller before his bedtime, then dive into her studies. Reeve juggled his shifted schedule with grace, though she often found him dozing on the couch with Miller and Rook both sprawled across his chest. "You're my hero," she told him one evening, kissing his forehead as she gathered her books for class. "Just returning the favor." He smiled sleepily. "You were ours first." The training itself was intense but deeply satisfying. Brenna discovered that her experience gave her a unique perspective. Ainea. She understood viscerally what it meant to be on the other side of an emergency. During practical exercises, she found herself naturally empathizing with panicked patients, knowing exactly how it felt to need help and hope it arrived in time. Una became a regular fixture in their lives, stopping by to quiz Brenna on protocols or demonstrate techniques. She brought her own experiences into the lessons, helping Brenna connect textbook knowledge with real-world application. "The medicine matters," Una would say, "but so does the humanity. Sometimes people just need to know someone competent cares." Months passed, marked by milestones both big and small. Miller took his first steps during one of Brenna's study breaks, toddling straight into Rook's patient embrace. Brenna aced her first major exam. Reeve got promoted at work, partly due to his consistent reliability during the schedule change. Through it all, Rook remained their steady companion, but his demeanor had shifted subtly. The desperate vigilance of their old apartment was gone, replaced by a calm watchfulness. He no longer needed to press against Miller constantly. Instead, he kept a relaxed guard, content in the knowledge that his family was safe. One peaceful evening, after a particularly good day at training, Brenna found herself on the couch with her family. The same light, blue blanket that had witnessed their darkest moments now draped comfortably across her legs. Miller slept soundly in her arms, his warm weight a constant reminder of everything they'd fought to protect. Reeve had dozed off beside them, one hand resting protectively on Miller's back. Rook lay curled at their feet, his breathing deep and even. He looked up at Brenna with those soulful eyes that had once seen danger no one else could detect. Now they held only contentment, the peace of a guardian whose charges were finally, truly safe. Looking around their new home, Brenna felt the profound difference in the quiet. Gone was the underlying current of fear, the constant tension of waiting for alarms or symptoms. In its place was a deep, earned peace, the kind that comes from knowing not just how to survive, but how to protect. She thought about the dog who wouldn't move, who had pressed himself against her baby with such desperate intention. Now she understood completely why he couldn't be shifted. Love that profound demands action, demands courage, demands purpose. The textbook on her side table caught her eye, and she smiled, thinking of how far they'd come. What had started as instinct, both hers and Rook's, had evolved into something more. Her maternal need to protect had found focus and form in her EMT training. Their brush with tragedy had transformed into a calling. Miller stirred slightly in his sleep, and Brenna adjusted the blanket around him. The same blanket that had once been knotted into an emergency escape route now served its intended purpose, menace, providing comfort, marking home. Its light blue color caught the evening light, a reminder that even the most ordinary things could become extraordinary when love demanded it. This quiet moment mirrored where their journey began, a family at rest, a protective dog, a blue blanket in the lamplight. But everything else had changed. The fear that had once filled similar evenings had been replaced by knowledge and purpose. The instincts that had saved them had been honed into skills that could save others. The danger that had nearly destroyed them had instead forged them into something stronger. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.